So if you have a shoebox full of 1911 parts and you don't know what they all are, that's okay. We're going to get to that in just a second. Hey YouTube, welcome back to Arcane Armory. Today we're going to be doing a complete disassembly and reassembly of our 1911 GI pistol. First, I want to apologize for my voice. I'm just getting over a little bit of a cold, so I'll try to edit out whatever snuffles and coughs that I can. But in the meantime, like I said, I apologize. Before we get started, first thing we got to do, like we always do with everything we disassemble, is make sure that it is clear. So we remove our magazine, it is empty, lock our bolt to the rear, and we check in here. Nothing. So this firearm is clear. So now we can proceed with our disassembly. Okay, so before we get started here, we got our tools laid out. Some of these are mandatory, some of them are more of convenience items. So our mandatory tools are going to be the screwdrivers for taking apart the grips, and this is going to really help with pulling our extractor out. We need a little mallet. We're not going to use that very much, but there's a couple of pins that are just under enough tension we're going to need it. 3 different sizes of punches, and our convenience items are going to be the bench block and the barrel bushing tool. Barrel bushing tool, you definitely don't absolutely need that, but it does save your fingers quite a bit of strain. And if you're going to be doing this quite often, then it's definitely worth the money. The other thing that's going to be helpful is our Harbor Freight parts organizer here. That'll help us remember where everything's going to go. And of course, iPro, because nothing says I'm super cool like poking your own eye out with a damn spring. Okay, so step 1 is our field strip. So we're going to use our barrel bushing tool. We can see that it has a government side and an officer side. This is a government frame, so we're going to be using the government side. Trick with this, make sure that your safety is turned on. If you try to do this with the safety turned off, it will push the slide back and it doesn't work right. So safety on. And we got to be a little bit careful here because this spring wants to shoot out and take out your eye. So don't point this at yourself while you're doing it. Push in on our bushing tool, rotate, and we gently pull this back. We're done with him for now. There's our recoil spring plug. We can turn our safety off because we need to move the slide. Pull the slide back and you'll see the slide lock. Let's see. You'll see the slide lock notch, and this notch right here, much smaller notch, is the takedown notch. We're going to line that with our takedown pin. And we'll push on it on the back side, push it up from the bottom, and remove our takedown pin. Now we can move our slide forward, and the slide comes straight off of the firearm. We'll set our slide, or set our frame aside, and we'll work with the slide for right now. So we'll take out the base of our recoil spring assembly, and our barrel link needs to be down, and we can slide it right out the front as well. Well, we can slide it out the front as soon as we take our bushing off, which requires a partial turn, and then the bushing will slide out of the front. Now our barrel can come out, and we have a field strip 1911. Now, of course, the field strip is not the hard part, and that's not what we're focused on here. So we'll finish detail stripping our slide. I'm going to leave the sights on because that's just not something that we're going to do as part of maintenance or refinishing, but this is a Series 70 slide, which means that there is no hammer block safety in this. So all we have to do is take out the firing pin spring, and the extractor. For this, we're going to use a smaller punch. And this spring is under quite a bit of tension, so it wants to fly out as well. Don't point it at your face. So all we have to do is push in on the firing pin, and we'll slide our firing pin block down. And at this point it is partially dropped, so we can point it kind of towards the table, and it pops out. So here's our firing pin spring, our firing pin block. Put those in our container. Now we can use our screwdriver. We're going to be very gentle here, especially if you have a finish that you really care about. The screwdriver can really scratch this if you're not careful. But our extractor is right here in the back of the slide, and we can reach into the same groove where the firing pin block was and give our screwdriver just a little bit of a twist. and we'll see our extractor start to pop out from the back of the slide. You can pry on this gently. Like I said, you got to be really careful if you have a finish that you're really concerned of. This is a rock island that I had sent to me, and I don't really care about the finish. It's more of a project gun than anything else. But you could use a piece of masking tape on these surfaces if you wanted to, and it'll help protect that just a little bit. Now our extractor can slide out, and we have a detail stripped 1911 slide with no mechanical pieces in it. This slide is ready for finishing or service or whatnot. Now moving on to our frame, we're going to decock our frame. And the first thing I'm going to do is take off our grips. A lot of folks have nice grips and we want to prevent any damage to them. With these screws, make sure that you're using a screwdriver that actually fits it. If you're using a screwdriver that's too small, you will tear the heads out of those screws. These screws aren't in here particularly tight because I have them in and out all the time because I'm always messing with this gun. But yours might have some Loctite on them, or they might be torqued down quite a bit tighter. And like I said, this particular example is a Rock Island Armory. So if you're using a different manufacturer, you may have different screw head style. But just make sure that the screwdriver fits. So now what we can do is we want to drive out our mainspring housing. That'll take all the tension off of our hammer spring. It'll loosen up some of these pins up here and make it just a little bit easier. Now this doesn't need a whole lot of whaling on it. It just needs a little bit of convincing to go the right direction. So I'm going to use a little punch. If you really got a whale on it, something is wrong. Another hint, make sure it's not cocked when you're doing that, or that thing will come flying out of there. Now we can pull our mainspring housing down, but we do not want to fully remove it because it keeps our sear spring happy in there. So at this point, we can start taking out our safety and our thumb safety. There is a little surprise spring in here though. In this tube, there's a spring that as soon as you remove your thumb safety, this will come shooting out. So A, don't point it at your face, and B, have it kind of pointed down towards the table so it hits the table and doesn't go anywhere. It is easier to have the hammer in the cocked position, and we can push on the back of the pin with our finger. And once again, we're watching this spring to make sure it doesn't come flying out. And we can pull on our safety, rotate it up, pull it out, and here's our plunger tube spring. Now at this point, we can take our small punch, we push out the hammer pin, and push out the sear pin. They just slide out the back. There's our hammer and our strut, our thumb safety, and now we can remove our mainspring housing and our sear spring. There are still two parts in here, being the sear and the disconnector. Give the disconnector a little poke from the top. It'll fall out. So here's our sear, our disconnector, our sear spring, our pins, hammer. So now we can take out our magazine catch. Here's where a small screwdriver comes in handy, where we're going to push on the magazine catch from the backside and give this just a 1/4 of a turn twist. And we'll feel it click, and it can be removed from this side. That was the only thing holding the trigger in, so now we can push the trigger back and shake it out the bottom, and here's our trigger. Now here's our finished slide. I'm going to leave the grip bushings in for right now. There's not much reason to take those out unless you want to swap them out, but I'm just going to leave those in there for right now. Now we can do a couple more steps here. We're going to put our parts into our bin. Now we can take this apart with our small screwdriver again. And again, there's a spring in here, so when you take this apart, it's going to want to come flying out. So just give this a 1/4 rotation up, and out it comes. Now the mainspring housing is a little bit more difficult. There is a big spring in here. It's under a lot of pressure, so it wants to come flying out of there. Once again, don't point it towards your face. We're going to control this spring, so we can push in on the spring plunger. And this pin down here needs a little bit of convincing. So what I tend to do sometimes is I use my bench block. If you have one, I'll use a small pin or a small punch, and then I can position this punch just to push that out. Now my punch is holding that spring in place. So here's our pin. Our punch is serving as what they call a slave pin. Now we can push this in, punch falls out, and we slowly release this, defending ourselves from that spring a little bit. So there's our mainspring housing, the mainspring retaining pin, our mainspring, and its ends. So as we can see here, we have all of our parts organized into the bin. I have major components in together because those are pretty easy to keep track of. The rest of them are all in by subassembly. So one part goes with all of its other parts, and each pin goes in with each part. So if you have a shoebox full of 1911 parts and you don't know what they all are, that's okay. We're going to get to that in just a second. Okay, so for reassembly, we're going to start with our subassemblies and work our way up to the bigger components. And I'm going to try and do this so that you can see the smaller pieces. So if you have a shoebox full of parts, you'll see what they are. So the first thing, we have our magazine catch and its spring and its retainer. And you can see there's a slot in the back of our magazine catch here. So magazine spring, the magazine catch spring goes into our magazine catch, and the retainer goes into the spring. There's apparently a right way and a wrong way. So you see it's got this little nub on it. It goes into this groove. So gotta be a little bit careful here because this will shoot out if we don't get it lined up just right. Push it in, give it a quarter of a twist. And there we go. Magazine catch is reassembled. The next group of parts is our mainspring assembly. This piece goes on the top. The pointed piece goes on the bottom. So pointed piece points towards the bottom. Put that over the painted end. Put that into our mainspring housing. Now this little pin, I like to pre-stage that in the hole if we can get it there. Slide this piece into the top. Now this can be a little bit challenging. And we've got to be careful because if we slide our punch off the side, this will go shooting out. There, our pin dropped in, and away we go. Our pin's fully seated, and we're done with that. Now we can start putting the components back into our 1911 frame. The first thing we're going to put in is our trigger. Now when you put the trigger in, you want this slanted surface facing up towards the hammer. So this will just drop in the back. And then our magazine catch is what holds that in place. So drop this in here. Notice it doesn't go all the way in. Take our small screwdriver and give this a quarter return. To twist this in, the magazine catch has to be above flush on the frame just a little bit. Give it a twist and it pops in. Our magazine catch is in and our trigger is retained. The next one is a little bit of a hassle. I'm going to try and hold this so you can actually see in there. So our next set of parts are the sear, the disconnector, and their retaining pin. This flat portion of the disconnector is going to face that angled bit on the trigger. Now these two sit nested like this inside the frame. This pin isn't going to want to line up, but I'll show you how to handle that. When we put it in our sear, the curved pointed surface right here needs to be facing towards the hammer. So these will sit in like this, the flat surface towards the trigger and the pointed surface towards the hammer. So our disconnector is going to slide in. It's going to go through the small hole that is in our frame and poke up through the top of our frame. And one of the tricks is trying to keep this centered from left to right with it resting on the back of the trigger. And it's not really a good way to do this with not getting something in the way, but sliding this in and then dropping it right in between. Now our pin is not going to want to push through here, so there's a way to solve that issue. We start our pin in the back, and you're going to see that it hits on our disconnector or on our sear. We can use the trigger, we push up, and that brings everything into alignment inside. Pull the trigger up, and we got the pin to go through. So now obviously we want to shake this, make sure that neither one of those two parts fall out, and then those are installed. The next part we want to install is our hammer and our strut and its retaining pin. So what we'll do with this, simply slide this in. It is going in the forward hole, not the rearward hole. The rearward hole is for our thumb safety. So once again, the same thing here. Move it to the not cocked position and slide our pin in from the back. Now, move our strut out of the way, and we'll take our sear spring. The hook on our sear spring needs to be facing in towards the trigger. There is a small notch on the bottom of our sear spring, and it goes into this notch here on the receiver. So we install our sear spring like so, and then we're going to put in our mainspring housing, but not all of the way. Just enough to hold that sear spring in place. The reason we do that is because if we put in our thumb safety before we put the mainspring housing in, it will warp our sear spring off to the right. And fold our mainspring strut down. Okay, so our next three parts are going to be our thumb safety, our grip safety, and our safety D10. So this we're going to put into our frame first. The small plunger on the front faces forward. The large plunger on the rear faces aft towards the hammer. Slide this in here. Install our grip safety. Now we can put the pin of our thumb safety in through the grip safety. So what I like to do with this is to avoid any scratching is I'll take my small screwdriver, and it's a little bit awkward for me to do this, keeping everything in the camera, but push this plunger in and snap our safety into place. So we have our thumb safety installed, our grip safety installed, our hammer, trigger, and our magazine catch. Now we can finish installing our mainspring housing and do a functions check. Our mainspring housing pin will be up next, and you can identify it with this small groove that runs down the middle of it. One of the keys here is to ensure that the hammer strut is actually going into the mainspring housing, and you might have to shake and jiggle this just a little bit, slide that up, and then depress the grip safety and continue sliding it the rest of the way up. The mainspring housing pin and its hole will align pretty well if you get that pushed all the way up. Drop in our pin here. There's a detent in there. Push this in, and this will need just a little bit of convincing from our mallet. Again, we shouldn't have to go wailing on it. If you're wailing on it, something is wrong. So at this point, we can functions check our frame, make sure that it cocks, stays half cocked, full cock, and then if we pull the trigger, it shouldn't fire. If we engage the thumb safety, pull the trigger, we should be able to ease the hammer forward. So now we can put our grips on, and our frame is done. Now I'm not planning on shooting this again before I take it apart again. I'm going to do some work on this. So these screws are just getting snugged in. A little torque to about 5 inch-pounds should suffice to hold these on, or if you want to be extra sure, you could use just a little bit of blue Loctite. Anything more than that, and you might back out the bushings with the screws and then not be able to get it apart. Well, there is our assembled frame. Now we can move on to our slide. So for our next set of components, we have our extractor, our firing pin spring, our firing pin, and our firing pin block. The first thing that we're going to put in here is our extractor. See the little claw hook on this? This is going to be facing in towards the bore. So slide it in here. Gets to be a little tension on there. And we just want it to fit flush with the back of the slide. So you can see here it's sticking up just a little bit. We want to just kind of smooth that over so that it feels like one continuous piece. And and it's not for performance out here, or it's not for appearances out here, it is to make sure that this channel is lined up so that our firing pin block can actually slide into it. So next we can put in our firing pin spring, put in our firing pin, and then we'll start our firing pin block with our rounded corners facing the rear sight. And we get our hammer or our firing pin block started, and we just finish pushing that into place. At this point, our slide is reassembled and we're ready to reassemble the firearm. So our reassembly process after field strip is one that can get a lot of 19 assemblers in trouble, as there's what they call the idiot scratch. And it's when you push this into the frame and rotate it, and it scratches this portion of the frame right here. We want to try to avoid that. This is not a gun that has any particular significant meaning for me, but I think as a habit it is good to try and avoid that whenever we can. So at this point we can reassemble our firearm, and we'll put our barrel in. Now, I tend to put the barrel bushing in now because that helps keep the barrel aligned. So push our barrel bushing in, rotate it until it drops into place, and then rotate the barrel bushing out of the way of our recoil spring. That keeps the barrel nice and straight in there. So when we go to drop in our recoil spring base, it makes it a little bit easier to slide the frame and the slide back together. Now we can move the slide back to where our takedown notch is where the pin is supposed to be. And once again, what I prefer to do is leave plenty of room in here. Sometimes you have to give the thing a little bit of a shake, and then your barrel link will hang down. You'll be able to see it through the pinhole there, and then you can install your pin. But don't push it all the way down just yet. We want to lay this down, making sure there's plenty of space here. Take our small screwdriver, depress our detent plunger, and there's enough room if your screwdriver is small enough, and push our pin into place. So you'll notice on the recoil spring there are two ends. One end is open coiled and the other end is closed coiled. We're going to put the closed coiled end towards the trigger. And install this here, and we want to make sure it's over our base assembly. When you put it in, you can feel it, and we can feel that it has grabbed that other piece. You can see it right there. Take our plug, put it over the top. We've got to be a little bit careful here so we don't launch this into outer space or put out an eye. But we're going to guide this in gently.
That's what she said.
And you can use something like your bench block, but for this particular process it's not too bad. So we'll just slide this in, push it all the way down, rotate our barrel bushing so it snags it, and then we can use our punch, just give us a little bit extra room, rotate our bushing over the top. So at this point we're fully reassembled and it is time for a functions check. We're going to do a two-stage functions check, one with no snap caps and then one with two of our snap caps. So at this point our pistol is reassembled, our pistol is cocked, and our thumb safety is in the off position. That's where it's going to fall naturally after you've installed the slide. So at this point, we want to make sure that our thumb safety can go on. We're going to pull the trigger. The hammer should not fall. We'll depress the grip safety, pull the trigger. The hammer should not fall. And if we turn the thumb safety to the fire position, pull the trigger, the hammer should not fall. And if we depress the grip safety and pull the trigger, the hammer should fall. So our fire control group is working as it should. For the last part of our functions check, we just want to verify that all 8 steps of the cycle of operations are being performed. So, safety off, we start with cocking, feeding, chambering, and locking. Firing, unlocking, extracting, and ejecting. All again. This, we've held down our trigger so we can see that our reset is working. One more time. And now we want to see it lock open on the empty magazine. So this firearm is functioning as designed, as far as we can tell without doing a test fire or live fire. So thanks for watching. If you guys found that helpful, please consider like and subscribe, and let me know down in the comments if you have any suggestions on the next firearm I should totally disassemble and reassemble for you. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.